The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar about centralized SAP security monitoring. My name is Michael Kummer, and with me I have Alessandro Banzer, who's going to guide you through today's webinar. We're going to wait about another minute or so because people are still joining, so we don't have to repeat everything from the introduction, and so we'll get going here in a minute. All right, Alessandro, I guess we can get started. The good news is we're going to have a recording, so whoever misses the intro can certainly rewatch it. But again, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate that you're here with us for the next hour talking about centralized SAP security monitoring. Alessandro Banzer is going to be your presenter today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As I've mentioned already, we're going to have a recording, and typically within 24 hours, you'll get an email from GoToWebinar with a link to the recording, and we'll also upload the recording then once we have it to YouTube. And so you'll likely hear from a gentleman by the name of Sean Walsh, and he's going to send you an email with a link to the YouTube recording, so you can watch it there as well. Also, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel. So depending on what version of GoToWebinar you have, on mine, it's on the left, and there is a little tab called questions. If you click on it, it'll expand, and you can type in your questions. I'm going to keep tabs on those questions throughout the webinar. I'll answer what I can, but most likely we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and so Alessandro will answer any questions in the remaining time. And also want to announce that we have an in-depth SAP Fiori webinar series coming up in a couple of weeks, and we'll have a link to that at the end of the presentation. So we're going to share that link with you, but you will also receive an email with the invitation so you can register for that as well. And with that said, we're going to turn off our camera so you can focus on the content and not so much on us. And I'll hand it over to Alessandro.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. My name is Alessandro Banzer. I'm here to talk about our centralized security monitoring solutions that we have for hybrid SAP landscapes. I've prepared a couple of slides showing the details of what we do, how we do it, and then also as part of the webinar, we'll show a demo live in the system of how the tools work in action, so to say. Maybe a few words about us before we get started. For those of you that don't know us just yet, Xiting has been founded back in 2008 in Switzerland. We are here in the United States since 2016, so a couple of years already, almost 6 years. Have offices, obviously, primarily around Europe. We're in Germany, in the UK, but also in Romania. We have a service center in Romania for support services in the area of SAP security. Overall, we have a little bit over 100 employees, so we're in a growing spurt, I would say, as a company, adding on a lot of people because business is obviously going good and therefore growing. We are a SAP Gold partner. We have different recognized expertise, for example, in GRC, governance, risk, compliance. We're sub-certified in different areas. We're as a Gold partner, we're certified in service authorizations for the business technology platform, but then also our solutions that we provide to our customers, they are fully certified, for example, for the S/4HANA environment. So if one of you guys are, for example, a cloud customer of SAP and runs S/4HANA in the cloud, the private cloud, for example, our software is fully certified to be installed on the S/4HANA cloud. With that being said, let's jump right into the topic. As Michael indicated, if there's any questions throughout the webinar, just use the questions tab and put them in there. We'll try to answer them throughout the webinar, or then we do a Q&A session at the end. Couple more things before we really go into the topic. Obviously, Xiting offers a lot of different solutions, and we cover multiple different use cases when it comes to SAP security. Don't want to point every single one out here, but just so from a big picture perspective, we have obviously solutions in the access governance and compliance area. Some of it we'll see today. The central security monitoring is kind of like across cybersecurity, but also access governance and compliance when it comes to GRC or following compliance guidelines like GDPR, SOC, CMMC, and so on. So we have tools that help our customers to be compliant when it comes to the access governance piece of the business. We have tools in the area of securing custom ABAP code, and then obviously a lot of stuff around the cybersecurity that I'm going to talk through today, where we'll see a couple of demos. How do we do central security monitoring? How can we do real-time alerting in case of an incident, in case of a finding? How can we integrate with CM solutions? So if you have a CM solution like ArcSight or QRadar or Azure Sentinel or any CM tool you have out there, we can integrate, and we'll also talk through that. And then on the other hand, we have tools in the area of authorizations management. That's probably most of you guys know us from that area when it comes to Fiori authorizations, S/4HANA migrations, or just in general when it goes around roles and authorizations, authorization redesigns for dialogue users, for technical users like RFC users. That's where we have, I would say, the strongest solutions are in the authorization side of the business. And then also we have smaller tools, more streamlined tools for in the area of identity access management when it comes to compliant access provisioning workflows, mask changes for users as well as for roles, user recertification, user access reviews, all that kind of stuff goes along with it as well. And then on top of that, we also provide a lot of services around secure authentication, single sign-on, for example, not only on the on-premise or in the on-premise world, also in the cloud world. So if you have cloud applications and you need have any needs to secure authentication with the IAS or different tools out there, come and talk to us. We're very strong in that regard as well. With that being said, today we want to look into the central security monitoring. We'll see what we offer in that area. We'll see a live demo of how it works. We'll look into the tool so you can kind of get like a little bit of a feeling. And I will also show a demo of a real-time alert. How would that look like in a case something happens? And what I'm trying to demonstrate, we'll see that here in just a little bit. A very simple check, one of many that we have, but just a very simple one so everyone can follow. That's basically, I assign SAP all to a user in production, and we'll see that there's a real-time alert triggered because we don't want someone to have SAP all in production. That's one of the parameters we're monitoring, and we have real-time alerts on that. That's just one very little example, but I hope everyone can follow me along there. And then we'll also talk through how would that look like, if you integrate with a CM tool, or if you don't have a CM tool, how can we use email adapters so you get the alerts by email and so on. With that being said, let's jump right into the topic. We're all aware that when it comes to the authorizations or SAP security in general, the SAP security is very fragile. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong if we do things the wrong way, or we're not following best practices, or we just do misconfiguration, or maybe we forget to configure something across the entire landscape. So the authorization piece, which we are very strong in when it comes to implementing authorization designs and so on, that alone is not enough to protect our SAP system. It certainly with proper authorizations, and if your authorizations under control, we reach a very high level of security already. But on top of that, or below that, however you want to call it, there's also configurations that go along with an SAP system in general. Security, configuration, parameterization that we have to do in the system to protect, our system in general. When it comes to the SAP system, obviously they are sitting behind a firewall. So basically firewalls, they're there to protect external attacks and stuff like that. There's different things that can be done from a network security and so on. But one of the biggest risks is also, people that we let into our system, so intentionally, like for example, our employees, but then also someone that has, remote access through VPN and so on. And that's also one thing that you always have to, be aware of, that we allow people to use our systems. They can authenticate themselves, and we provide them authorizations within the solution. And then there's always the potential of misuse, with disgruntled employees, or someone that gets laid off and we forget to lock the access. Maybe it's a contractor, whoever it is, can be an employee, a disgruntled employee, and has something in mind that we don't like. And we want to always be on the lookout of potential attacks. And then on top of that, there's obviously all the laws and regulations that go along with SAP security. And there's always two sides to it. There's the internal side to it. With our internal policies, we have obviously security policies and all kind of stuff in place. So if we're not complying with our internal policies, it is what it is. But as soon as there's external compliance and laws and regulations that come into play, like SOX compliance, GDPR compliance. Now here in the US, a big topic with CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model certification that every DoD contractor now has to go through. If we don't follow and adhere to those regulations, that can result in fines, or even worse, in bad reputation, where we would lose the trust to our, for our customers or any shareholder out there, whether it's investors and so on. So it's very important that we're always, look at security from an entire perspective. Authorization is one piece, but then configuration is one other piece, and also not just implementing certain parameters, implementing certain standards and designs and concepts, also making sure we're always monitoring it on an ongoing basis, all the way down to real-time alerts in case something goes wrong. So what does that mean? When we talk about SAP security, and not so much just about authorizations, just in general, one of the biggest problems, especially when we deal with external stakeholders or laws and regulations, one of the biggest problems is always that we have to have security concepts in play. I see that right now. I'm just doing a project that deals with CMMC. Everything needs to be documented. Not only has it to be documented, we also have to prove that the security configuration, everything that's specified in the concept, is implemented the right way in the tool, in the system. Not just in one system, across the entire landscape. That includes our on-premise world, but then even the cloud world, whether we run S/4HANA in the cloud, or maybe even potential cloud applications that that we might be using. On top of that, when it comes to security concepts and putting concepts into play, the thing is always we write them and then they get outdated. So that's a big problem. So we specify concepts and we invest a lot of time, but over time those concepts get out of shape, they get outdated. There's pieces missing, or there's information in there that's not accurate anymore. And very often those security concepts, it's the last thing we update. We always wait for someone to tell us, and we're not very proactive about that. That's a big challenge we always have. Then on top of that, like I just mentioned, in nowadays business environment, the infrastructure, our landscape gets more complex, more networked. We have hybrid approaches between on-premise, cloud applications. Not only do we have to talk about the application server, we also have to talk about the underlying, for example, database. Now is SAP HANA, as for example, and a lot of things that come into picture that we have to be aware of, that we have to monitor, that we have to make sure it's securely implemented. Then there's a big need now in various industries, that SAP systems now have to connect, have to talk and connect to CM systems, for any kind of security monitoring, centralized security monitoring in a greater scheme, not just SAP. So that information from SAP has also been passed on to a CM system. We'll see that here in a little bit, how we also approach that and how we can help our customers down that route as well. On top of that, there's a lot of stuff that's going on with unauthorized use, excessive use of access privileges, admin authorizations, critical profiles, and so on. Then always elevated access, privileged accounts like firefighter accounts. All that stuff needs to be monitored, needs to be have to be compliant, and so on. Then, as I already mentioned, misconfiguration, configuration changes that are not authorized. All that stuff also needs to be monitored. It goes beyond the authorizations, because certain users, they have the ability to change certain configuration in the system, but it always has to be authorized. What if someone does something they're not supposed to do? Can be by accident, can be intentionally. We have to be aware of that from a security perspective, from a cyber perspective, that we're always on, keeping track what's going on in our system. Also, when it comes to sensitive access, obviously critical access from a GRC perspective, all the way down to compromised accounts, unauthorized logins, and so there's a lot of challenges that are floating around the sub-security people that we have to follow and try to have answers for, and that's basically what we're trying to do with our solutions. So let's see how that works. Xiting has different tools in different areas. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but what I want to show with the slide here is that our solutions are complementary to your existing landscape. So for example, if you have, SAP access control GRC, and you have a rule set there, you do your risk analysis, for critical access, for segregation of duty conflicts, and so on. We don't have to replace that or re-implement that. We can utilize that. So even with our, for example, our CM connector, we can utilize that information from a GRC and also pass it on and do certain checks, reports, in combination with, for example, GRC, or even if you have IAG connected to GRC in the bridge mode, all of that. On top of that, then also, we can obviously talk to other systems like, enterprise threat detection, any type of CM system you have out there. So what I'm trying to say here is we're not replacing any of your existing solutions. We're more complementary, and we're trying to, combine everything so that it's more interconnected, and you get more for your buck at the end of the day. When it comes to our security monitoring solution, what are the core functionalities that we have? So first of all, and we'll see that in the system. So I'm in a minute here, I'm jumping off to the system, and I'll show you how it looks like in the system directly, because I think that's always much better to see it with your own eyes than me just talking through it. So first of all, what we have is we have security concepts that we deliver out of the box. So they're best practice templates that we worked out over the years together with leading auditing firms, that contain best practices, industry best practices from SAP user groups. For example, in Germany, they have very strong security guidelines, but also here in the US, that are predefined, pre-delivered, that you guys can use as our customers, and then they're fully flexible, so they can be fully customized to your needs. The security concept is, at the end of the day, it's like a Word document that you have, but it's not in Word, it's in our tool, it's in SAP. And that concept is very dynamic. It pulls information from the system, it verifies information in the system, and it also keeps up to date. So if you change your security configuration, then the concept will update itself, unless we have parameters defined that have to be there, like a stupid basic example, password rules. We say our password rules must be the minimum password length must be 8-character long. That's something we specify in the concept, and that is something that can be analyzed across your entire landscape, making sure that every SAP system follows that parameter because it's written down into the concept. That can be done ad hoc, recurring, with scheduled reports and so on. But it's fully customizable. So we obviously send best practices back to the minimum password length. We say it must be 8 characters long. If your security policy says it must be at least 10 characters long, then we would obviously have to update that parameter in the concept, and then you check against your own concept. So we basically just deliver a baseline with the industry best practices that you guys can use. And that's basically what I said. So we deliver concepts for any ABAP system, for HCM, even for GRC system, for Java, for HANA. And so there are different concepts that, for different types of systems, because, obviously a GRC system, even though it's an ABAP system at the end of the day, there's different things in GRC, in access control, that need to be protected on top of the baseline than, for example, in an S/4HANA system. So that's why we have different concepts. All our concepts, they come with different checks where we can, basically analyze and validate whether what's in the system is also reflected. What's in the concept is reflected in the system. Again, with the minimum password length, that's in the concept. We can check that in the entire landscape. And that's just one of over 250 checks that we bring as part of our concepts. Also, all those checks, they can be fully customized, fully extended. So we have ways to extend that with just Wizard. But you can also, all our customers, and some of our customers, they use custom user exits to extend those checks because they have a special need that we don't cover. Then it's also fully extendable. All the checks, like I said, we can run them ad hoc. We can some of them, we run recurring, maybe once a week, once a month. And then if there's any issues, in one of the systems, we want to create alerts. That can be on a weekly, on a monthly basis, or then also in real time if we want that. The entire checks that we run are stored, so we can always go back and see, how did we develop over the year. Maybe in the beginning of the year we had 100 finding across the board. At the end of the year, we only have maybe 5 left. So we did a good job, we got better, or maybe it got worse. So we can always see what's the trend, where we're going, and obviously we can always compare and look into the history and into the past as well, which is very important when we go through audits, making sure to prove to an auditor, we're significantly getting better. And that's basically from the architecture in a very simple means how it works. So we basically have our tool in the middle that we call security architect. That's how we call our solution, the security architect. The security architect comes with those concepts I was just mentioning. We define it, can use our baseline, our templates, then we customize the way you guys want to have it. And then at any given time, we can basically go ahead with different check modes that are part of the concept to validate the entire system configuration. And that's, as like I said, over 250 checks that we can run directly in a local system or against the entire landscape. And we'll see that here in just a little bit. Just a few screenshots before we jump into the system. How does it look like? It's basically, when we log in through the SAP GUI, different transactions that we have. And this is just one concept, for example, for the baseline concept for any ABAP system. So it's basically, comes with different chapters that we can use or not, so we can select or deselect. For example, here we have the central user administration, the CUA. If we don't use the CUA, then we just deselect it because obviously you don't use it. Doesn't have to be in the concept. Everything else in here is basically predefined, it's pre-written. So for example, here, that's also then the example I'm going to show you, a very simple one. We define critical profiles. So we say, okay, sub all, sub new, SA admin, and so on, S system. Those are critical profiles. Obviously, some users might be allowed to have sub all, maybe DDIC or WF batch, or whatever user you define to have sub all, even though not necessarily needed. But let's say you run your interfaces, for example, on sub all, and you're aware of that, and maybe you address that issue down the road. But at the moment, that's what it is. So you can basically mitigate those users. So like we can see here, in my concept, I have obviously a couple of users mitigated, like WF batch, and all the emergency users we have, as well as DDIC. That means if they have sub all, so they will not show up when we run a scan. And then what I can do, and I'll show it here in the system in a second, we can run the scan against the entire landscape. This is just one of many scans. So it's, for one, it's in document, and then we can validate that document against the landscape. Like we see here, so I ran that check here against 4 different systems. I can see what's the system type of them, and then I can see, okay, the result here in my sandbox environment, everything obviously is bad because we have a lot of users with critical profiles. And so that's also one of the things, we're writing it down. And at the end of the day, you can print it out as a PDF document, hand it over to your auditor. But at the same time, we can also provide a validation of your system for the entire landscape. So again, together with the document, we also can provide the results. Because it's good to say, no one should have sub all, but let's also verify. And that's usually what the auditor does, right? They go into the system, they run a SUIM report, they see who has sub all, and they say, hey, in your concept, you say no one should have it, but there's 20 users that have it. That's you're not compliant with your concept. And that's what we're reporting on an ad hoc basis. Here's just another screenshot of multiple checks I ran in more like a table view, where I can see, with a traffic light, green obviously means everything is good, red means there's an issue. And then, with all those traffic lights, I have drill down, and we'll see that here in a little bit in the system. When I go into the system, if we double click, we can obviously drill down into the details of that check. So for example, here is the very first one with the critical profiles. If I say my S/4HANA development system, it's red, I double click, and then I can see, who, for example, has SAP all, who has SAP new. It's all, in the latest detail to understand why that check failed, for example. Hope that makes sense. But we'll also see it again in the system. Overall, we have a lot of different use cases that we cover. Obviously, a lot when it comes to the authorizations. So, for example, critical roles, critical profiles, critical access just by itself, sensitive access. All that stuff can be covered. Then a lot around system configuration, how you define your profile parameters, for example, like the one I was mentioning with the minimum password length. That's just one of many parameters that we can monitor, and obviously we can monitor every single parameter in the system with our best practice baseline that we ship to our customers. There's a whole bunch of it already, but it's obviously fully extendable. Then also from a database perspective, HANA, there's different checks for HANA when it comes to data leaks and so on to understand what's going on. Also, when it comes to critical resources, for example, prohibited transactions or critical programs, critical function modules, if they were being used, and so on. Debugging code, obviously, if someone uses debugging in production and maybe changes a variable, that's something. Log settings when it comes to security audit log, for example, if someone deactivates the security audit log, or if the security audit log runs full, stuff like that. All the way down to SAP standard users, a very base thing, but it's still a big topic, because sometimes we forget about the standard users in maybe one client. That's a problem. So even stuff like that can be monitored, and also check if there was an unauthorized use of a standard user, like someone used DDIC or someone used Substar or sub support. That is something that can be monitored as well. On top of this, just a few of the use cases, more the standard ones. Obviously, there's a whole bunch behind that and on top of that we can also do. Centrally monitoring the landscape is one thing. So like I mentioned, we have a concept. We can obviously run scans ad hoc periodically and analyze how the system looks like. But nowadays, even more important is the connectivity into CM. A lot of customers now have CM tools, and we have to basically connect CM with SAP. Now, what we have as part of our security architecture tool behind this, the central security monitoring, we have basically a fully configurable CM cockpit that allows us to define what type of log files we want to pass over to CM, but then also based on all those checks that I was mentioning. So for example, if I come back with the one we'll see here in a second with the critical profiles. So if I want to report critical profiles and I want to monitor that in production, if someone assigns SAP all, I want to have the real-time alerting to CM. That's one check, that just one of the many that we can define and say, okay, if someone assigns SAP all, send an event over to CM. So it's not just an entire log file, it's really specified events that we can monitor and then pass over to CM. Because the biggest problem with CM is as soon as we, and that's based on experience from our customers, as soon as we connect SAP in CM very often accounts to more than 80 or 90% of the data in CM. So because in SAP, obviously, that's our core business application. That's where most of the users work, where most of the stuff is going on. And if customers just blindly connect to SAP and pull all the logs, it accounts to a lot of data within CM, and it's much better to pre-filter that and goes for specific events that are security critical to pass over to CM. And that's what we can fully configurable and customize what is being sent over to CM. Also, all the SAP standard logs, when it comes to security audit log, the HANA audit log, the system log, and so on, if you want to just move them over unfiltered to CM, that's obviously also possible. So we also have all the standard log extractors, we have them all available as well. But then really where I see a lot of use cases is with all those checks we have in our security guideline, the concept to monitor, and then specifically pass those critical events over to CM, so that it's not a whole bunch of events that has to be filtered and analyzed and processed in CM. So already processed in SAP and just really send over what's critical. And let's see how that looks like. So basically our security architect, the beauty of the security architect is that it can be installed on any SAP NetViewer system. So if you have an ABAP system, like for example your solution manager, we can use that as a central system. So there's no additional hardware required to get our tools installed. It just runs on an existing ABAP system. Very often we use the solution manager for it, because solution manager is connected to the entire landscape. So we have all the RFCs and the connectivity between the systems already established, and that's what we can utilize. But again, can be any other system. We even have customers that step up on just a standalone system for the central for our security architect. That's also possible, but it doesn't have to be. And then basically the security architect, our central system as we call it, then basically connects to all the satellite system, all the backend systems, so to say. So for example, any ABAP system, whether it's an S4HANA, a CRM, a BW, or an ECC, or even then HANA databases, Java systems, and so on, and can centrally monitor the entire landscape. And then from here, centrally, we pass over log files into CM. We're very open to any CM, so we haven't had one that we cannot serve. So basically, if you have IBM Curator or Splunk or ArcSight or Sentinel, whatever you guys have, it's very likely that our CM Connect out of the box can talk to those. In case you don't have a CM system, but you're interested in maybe taking the first step into real-time alerting, then what we also have as part of that is what we call an email adapter, that basically instead of sending events over to a CM system, we just send it out by email to like a distribution list that we can obviously fully configure. Certain events, we want to have alerted via email. So different ways are possible, and that way, like I just mentioned, if we just directly integrate from a CM tool to the SAP world, it's very inefficient because it's too much data that's being brought over. That's why when our version can basically be consolidated, analyzed, and then we send that over what's important. Also here, CM has to talk to one system and not to every single system. So it's also from that perspective much easier to handle. And on top of that, we have all those checks that we can add in addition to have really the critical security events monitored right there. That's basically how it works from an architectural perspective with that integration. Now let's take a quick look in the system. So I'm logging on here to my CUA. So I'm in my system is called XIE. This is my CUA system, and I have a test user here, and I just go in here and I assign sub all in one of the systems I'm monitoring. And the system I'm monitoring, and I have multiple here, but the one I'm after is that I call X53 client 100, and I assign sub all here. So I just did that. Let's just see how long it takes to get the email. Should be less than a minute. That's what's considered real time. Let me show you, before I show you the email, when we look into the security architect. So here I'm in my central mode. That's how it looks like. Here I have multiple systems connected, like for example, S4HANA systems, my local system, obviously, different systems that I can connect. And I have then my security concept that basically comes with pre-written text. So for example, I can see here CUA. What do we talk about CUA? And then what you can see here, if I make it a little bigger, there's pre-written information in here. And a lot of the components of that text form that we have here, is retrieved and is dynamically retrieved from the system. So if we talk about certain, things in the system, it's read from the system itself. On top of that, and we'll come back here, on top of that, I then have a lot of different checks that I can run. So there's different checks. You can see here we have checks in the user management area, in the system settings area when it comes to parameters, monitoring different parameters. Let me just deselect that. System security, who has, development access, all kind of stuff, security audit log, different things. Also from our role management, all the way down to naming conventions, making sure our roles follow naming conventions, and so on. And then also, obviously, a lot of stuff in the area of authorizations. What I was just mentioning before is the critical profiles, where I already mentioned I have a couple of users. They are mitigated, that we said, like WF batch and DDIC and all kind of admin users we have mitigated. And that check is basically linked with a chapter, and I can always see that. So I can, for example, let's just say I run that check against my landscape. I say check and show me that in the document. Just say here, run it in online. So it's now analyzing the entire landscape. Takes a second here to process. And then we should basically see the concept. We see it here. So let me just make this in full screen so it's easier. So we basically get a PDF document with our SAP security concept. I can see, which version I'm running, and I can see I run a check against 4 different systems. And then I see, in just an overview perspective, I have basically one issue in every system. And if I go down, I can see what is it. It comes from the concept. So here now it's only just showing that subchapter that talks about critical profiles. These are the ones that are defined as critical. And then I have here my mitigation. So it's okay for certain users like WF batch, DDIC, and so on. And if I keep scrolling, and obviously I have a lot of users here, test users that I don't want to show. And then here I can see against my entire landscape, why I have, for example, certain results. So for example, in my X53 that I'm monitoring, I can see I have one user with critical profiles. I can click here, and then I can see my TABA. So this is basically an ad hoc scan that I just ran ad hoc without any input. I just went in, run a scan, and I can then see why I have a finding. Now, obviously, I ran it ad hoc. We can also periodically schedule that once a week, once a month, and then send out that report that I have here by email. Now here, I ran it in like the document version, so I can also see the chapter it's in. So if I would navigate here to my chapter, 12.7, and go here, here, this is the chapter that talks about critical profiles. Now, obviously, that list that we see here, this is not static. It comes from a table that can be maintained. So everything, or a lot of pieces in the concept are dynamic content that's basically been put into the concept itself. Like I said, I ran the check and shown a document. I can also look at it from a table perspective. Like for example, here, the same check, or the ones I was just showing on the screenshots, where I can see, my landscapes here at the systems I'm scanning, basically the same results as before. And here I can also drill down and see, okay, yeah, there's one user that has sub all. So again, this is the ad hoc version. Let's see what happened with the email. So let me move over. And I talked a little longer than I wanted to talk. So we can already see here, there was an email sent. We can see it here. So that email just got here. And we can basically see, and this is just an email from our tool that's sent to distribution list. And here I can see, there's a new event reported. There's one user that has now sub all assigned in that system. Again, I monitor the entire landscape. Here, there's now one new incident with one system, and that's reported here in this example by email. The very same event can also be sent over to a CM system if you're using a CM system. Now here, just because of time, I just want to show you guys the email alert, which I think is very good start if you don't have a CM system. But obviously, if you have CM, then the very same alert will be sent to CM and then processed in CM. Or it can be a combination of both. Get the email, but also then have the alert pushed over to CM. And that's basically how that works in a nutshell. So it's all about the concept. First of all, we have the concept that can be printed out as a security baseline, but that concept comes with a lot of checks, with a lot of dynamic content that always keeps it up to date. And then obviously the parameters, what goes into the concept, like the minimum password length, that's something that needs to be specified in our central system. But just jump back here. That's basically what needs to be specified in the security audit, in the central system, and from there we can centrally monitor the entire landscape. It's as simple as that. I hope that makes sense. Michael, are there any questions to what I just said, or were
there are a couple of questions, not necessarily to what you just said, but from before. If you want, it's only 3. If you want to address them now or later.
Let's just do it now. Maybe one of them at least. We can.
All right. The first one is a quick one. Do we have concept for Java systems?
Yep. Yes, we do.
Yep. The other one is access control also stores critical transactions and authorizations. And the question is, what we have, is that a duplicate data basically, or can we pull from active access control or integrate with access control?
Either or. So we can either utilize the web service. Technically, we're using the web service of access control. So basically, the risk analysis, if you want, to analyze which user, for example, or which role has critical access, can either be run directly in our tool, but that means then the rule set needs to be in our system, in our tool, or we can utilize the web service from access control, and then access control analyzes that portion, sends it back to the security architect, and then we process it further. So it can be either or. That's what I meant, initially when I said like our solutions are more complementary. Obviously, a lot of customers already have SAP access control with the rule set. That's also what auditors, audit at the end of the day, and we want to utilize that. So we don't want you guys, if you don't want to, you don't have to replicate that work or move it over. We can just utilize your existing access control implementation.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one is, and maybe one more, and then we can move on. If our concepts also cover application settings, gateway, SAP router, and any activated services.
Yes, it does. So we have like, for gateway security, different things in there. If you have any specific questions, just let us know. We'll get back to you. But yes, gateway security is also part of the checks that we have.
Okay.
Like the second reg info files, for example, stuff like that.
Okay, perfect. Then I said, let's move on, and then we'll cover the rest of the questions at the end.
Sounds good. Yes, so basically, what are the benefits using our solutions? I already mentioned it. The best thing about it, obviously, is there's no additional hardware required. So you can utilize your existing landscape. You can also integrate with, for example, SAP access control and leverage that also as part of that central monitoring. On top of that, obviously, everything is fully transparent, so we can in real time analyze the entire landscape. Like I mentioned, we can add on ad hoc scans, real-time checks. We can also schedule it and run it periodically. A lot of things are possible. Then, as I mentioned, we integrate with all the major CM solutions, so we're very open to any type of formats that we have. So far, every customer that used the solution was able to connect, so we haven't had any issues there. So we're pretty confident that any CM solution you have, we can serve. And like I mentioned, we obviously can send over just the raw logs, if you will, or we can also pre-filter and run different checks against it, so that what's at the end of the day arrives in CM is not everything. It's just really already pre-filtered, if you will. As I mentioned, we deliver industry best practices that we over the years developed and enhanced with leading auditing firms, but that's all fully customizable. So we ship a baseline. You can add on top of that. So if you have stuff that we haven't covered, but that's important for you guys, we can add on to it. Or you can also change our pre-delivered content. Everything is versioned, so we have versioning. So if you change a version, it's all in different versions. So if you make a change, it creates a new version. So we can always look back, compare, stuff like that. All is in there so that, also from an auditing perspective, we have final versions, approved versions, all that is covered as part of the concept as well. And also on top of that, it's also a very fast deployment, so we can rapidly deploy the solution. Installation wise, it's very fast. Our tools can be installed via transport. We sit in our own table and namespace. We're not modifying any SAP standard code. We're fully certified by SAP. That means we're not doing anything that we're not supposed to do. So fully trusted solution, can be very rapidly installed. Installation takes like half an hour or so, and then obviously require a couple of configurations that need to happen, like if we do a central deployment, and then obviously we have to define the landscape, and then maybe customize some of the checks, going through the parameters, what's your if our baseline is what you guys have, super. If not, then we have to adjust. But it can be very rapidly deployed, a couple of days, and it's up and running. That's the beauty of our tool. On top of that, just maybe a little bit an outlook, vision, where we're working towards, just so you're, having that in the picture as well. And we're very open also here to receive feedback, but we're also looking to extend current concepts even further into cloud applications, SuccessFactors, Ariba, Analytics Cloud, or then the BTP in general. That's on the roadmap, because there's also obviously certain things that need to happen in the cloud applications. Obviously those are software as a service applications, so the configuration piece is not as extensive. But then maybe from an authorizations perspective, who are my admins in SuccessFactors, who can reset passwords, stuff like that. Also, who can change baseline configuration that we can do in those cloud applications, and also obviously different security concepts and stuff that comes along with it. That's on the roadmap as well. And then also we're looking very, very open to new concepts, new approaches with the for example, SOAR is a big topic, security orchestration, automation, response, to have not only identify and figure out stuff, like let's say what I was just showing with the SAP all. It's great to see and get the alert in real time that someone assigned SAP all. So if Michael assigns himself SAP all on a Saturday night 2 a.m. and I'm not logging in to my emails until Monday morning at 8 a.m., he can have done a lot of bad stuff over the weekend. Now obviously it's great if I get all the alerts, but something needs to happen. And there's a lot of potential also to automate responses for it. So let's say we say, okay, if someone assigns SAP all in prod and he's not mitigated to do that, then we lock the user, we remove SAP all, or we do a force logout. So we're also looking into opportunities there to automate the response, to keep the threat under under control, and obviously also then maybe open ourselves up to other technologies, especially in that area when it comes to automated response. That's kind of like on the roadmap, and we're also very happy to receive your feedback. If you guys think there's something that we're missing that would be very interesting, just let us know. We're also always hoping to collect information from you guys, obviously, because we're building solutions that are for our customers, that solves your issues or your problems you guys have. With that being said, just to wrap it up before we go into Q&A, I think we're all aware that cybercrime and security breaches are happening every day. If we open the newspaper or we go on the internet and we go through news sites, that's pretty much every day we can read about cyber incidents, and it's happening. So it's not something that is just once in a while. It really happens, and a lot of organizations, a lot of companies are affected by it. And SAP systems are always a very lucrative target, mainly because we have very sensitive data in the SAP system. There's a lot of data, there's a vast amount of data in SAP, and so it's a very lucrative target for someone that wants to attack us, or someone could be a nation state, can be hackers, hacker groups, all kind of form, or maybe just can be someone like a disgruntled employee that leaves or is very unhappy with his job and wants to do some harm before he leaves. So there's always something going on. Again, SAP systems are very lucrative targets. That's why we have to protect it. On top of that, if cyber incidents or any type of incidents, but primarily cyber incidents, if they happen and there are breaches and it gets out, and that's just what needs to happen. If there's a cyber incident, it needs to be actively communicated, and we have to have response plans in place and so on. But with that, we hurt our reputation. We might even lose the trust of our customers, or if investors or any other stakeholder that our organization have. So security is a big topic. And with that, Xiting is always here to come up with new solutions, find ways to protect even further. I mean, obviously, for those of you that know a little better, from the authorization side, that we cover 1 million use cases, but this goes beyond just authorizations. It's really security monitoring for parameters, for security settings, and so on that needs to happen. The beauty of our tools, if you already are a customer that uses our tools, this might just be something you're not utilizing today, but you have it already licensed as part of our solution that you purchased. This could be the next step to start going down the road of security monitoring. If you're not a customer, like I said, from an installation, from an implementation perspective, we're rapid, but also there's no additional hardware required, so it can be very quickly be installed. And on top of that, we leverage your existing infrastructure. If you have access control in place and you want to utilize that even forward, that's totally fine. That's why we integrate, because we want you guys to use that, but also move, for example, the risk analysis of access control up to the next level, to even integrate in monitoring, and then all the way down to maybe alerts, real-time alerts, all the way down to a CM integration. That's basically what this is all about. And with that, I would say, Michael, are there any more questions?
Yes, let me pull them up.
Okay.
First one is, there are rumors Microsoft is going to have their own SAP connector in Sentinel. And what are the benefits of using the Xiting solution if compared to Sentinel's built-in functionality? And I guess the question is more general. What's the advantage of using our concept versus directly integrating?
Yep. I think it really comes down to what we see here. So if you directly and yes, Sentinel can read SAP logs directly, but first of all, then Sentinel would have to be connected to all our SAP systems. It could be in the hundreds, or anyone you want to monitor. But also, it's reading raw data. So basically, you're just retrieving all the information, and then has to be processed. And you have to have patterns and different findings, and all that needs to happen on the CM side. Versus in our case, like I said, we can also pass on raw data, but we can excuse me, we can also on top of that, or in addition, or replacing that just the raw data and pass over what is really relevant from a security perspective. So like it's just obviously in the raw data we would somehow see that it was sub all assigned, but then the rules to identify that needs to happen on CM. Versus in our case, that's a predefined event, a pattern that we already have as part of our CM, and we only would pass on that pattern. So there would be one event coming to the CM system saying, hey, user assigned sub all in system so and so, rather than thousands of lines of data that needs to be processed in CM. And like I mentioned, from feedbacks as over the last couple of months, whenever customers implement CM, the SAP logs and the data that comes from SAP into CM accounts to 90% of all the data in CM. So it's a vast amount of data that needs to be processed on the CM side. And I think that's the big advantage of using what we have here. Hope that answers and makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Second one is, how is the security architect report different from what SAP delivers in terms of SOS reporting? I assume it means SOD reporting. So how is our SOD report different from what you get from SAP? And by SAP, I assume the person meant access control.
So it can be exactly the same. I mean, we can analyze critical authorizations, critical profiles, and also SOD conflicts. Like I said, we can either use our own engine that we have, like a risk engine to do that, or then we use access control. So it could, at the end of the day, be exactly the same. Obviously our own framework that we have is in use by customers that don't have an access control, but they need, that the ability to, analyze critical access, sensitive access, stuff like that, and they don't have access control, then they use our engine. If you already have access control, we would just leverage that. But at the end of the day, we get the same reports, or at least the same data. I mean, the reports obviously look different. Different tools have different UIs, but the data we look at is exactly the same.
Okay. Next question is, it's clear that our solution doesn't require a separate hardware, but is there any sizing upgrades required to run a centralized instance? Do they need to upgrade memory, database, space, what have you?
I would have to defer that back to more our implementation team, but as far as I'm aware, not that I'm aware of, because it's, we're only retrieving what is really needed, and especially when we do the CM connector, that's more like just passing it through. So it's more like a middleware that just routes it through to CM, so we wouldn't necessarily store it. Obviously, for the checks and all that stuff that's happening, the concept, and then the history that we record, that goes into our own tables. But that's, the tables, they're not going into the millions unless you run it, every minute you run a check and you just always store it, then potentially it could, but it's usually just a couple of thousands, maybe 10,000s, entries that go into the table. So from that perspective, database-wise, I don't think that it has any impact. So very often the sizing that customers have, it works very well. But we will confirm that with our implementation team to see if there's anything. But as far as I'm aware, that was never a concern. But we'll follow up and follow up on that by email as well.
Okay, and we got a clarification. The right term was actually SOS, as in Security Optimization Service. So going back to the previous question, the question was not about SOD reporting, but the SOS, the Security Optimization Service. Not sure if you're familiar with that.
I think that comes from the solution manager, and I have to be honest, I'm not very familiar with that, so I would have to defer that also, and we will follow up by email.
Okay. All right, and I think those are pretty much all the questions. Few comments that some customers had bad experience with SAP UI masking, but that was pretty much it as far as the questions are concerned.
Okay, perfect. Then, yeah, as Michael already mentioned, we have a couple more webinars coming up. For those of you that already attended the past Fiori sessions, this will basically be a continuation of those Fiori webinars we had, where we talked about the basics. Now we're doing more a deep dive into SAP Fiori security. We're talking about new concepts with spaces, pages, how that can be adopted, how do we implement spaces, pages, how do we migrate over from the groups approach to spaces and pages. That's in webinar 1. So we have 4 different sessions across November all the way into December. The second one will be about newer tools, support tools, helpful tools with the application help, in-application help. How can we do SU53 in Fiori, stuff like that. And then we also talk a little bit more from experience from our customers. So in session 3, we talk about the top pain points and lessons learned of customer projects. What you have to look out for when you implement Fiori, where are the pain points, what should be avoided, what's good to be prepared for. That's more like talking really from customer experience. I also have one of my colleagues with me, Jenny. She attended the previous sessions already. She's our Fiori master, and she'll talk about experience from projects. And then last but not least, in session 4, they were leaving the on-premise world a little bit, and we look into the cloud. We look into the SAP Fiori Central Launchpad service. That's a service on the business technology platform, where we basically can define or build a central launchpad for our entire environment. So if you have multiple systems and we have the embedded approaches in the backend, and we want to build a central launchpad that combines different apps from different servers, systems, so to say, we'll look into that. How does it look like? What do we have to look out for? And also see demos, and I'll show some hands-on. How can it be built? How it's implemented? What are the benefits? What's the cons? And so on. So we'll basically wrap up the deep dive into Fiori. If you want to register, here's the link. You can if you register, it registers for all the 4 sessions. As always, if you cannot make it to the live event, just sign up. You'll get the recording, and you get all the information that goes along with it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see you all there.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Again, you'll get a link with a recording typically within 24 hours, and then a follow-up email from Sean with a link to YouTube as well, so you can watch it there. And if you have any questions that we couldn't answer, feel free to shoot us an email. Alessandro's contact information is, or just reply to the webinar invitation, and we'll get it, or just send an email to info@xiting.us. And with that, we hope to see you in the next webinar. Thanks, Alessandro, for walking us through the topic
Thank you,
today.
Michael.
And see you guys next time. Bye.